Morning, welcome everybody. My name is Karen Hyde. I'm your presiding member today for this Metro Inner Development Assessment Panel, Tuesday the 20th of May, 2025. I declare the meeting open at 9:33 a.m. I acknowledge that we are hosting this meeting on the traditional land of the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, and we acknowledge the Aboriginal people as the traditional custodians of Western Australia and pay respects to elders past and present and the ongoing connection between people, land, waters and community. The meeting will be run in accordance with the DAP Standing Orders 2024 under the Planning and Development Assessment Panel's Regulations 2011. The meeting is being recorded and live streamed on the DAP website in accordance with Regulation 42A of those regulations. Members are reminded to announce their name and title prior to speaking. Panel members may refer to technical devices throughout the meeting to assist them in considering the information before them. I will introduce our members of the panel today. My name is Karen Hyde as presiding member. To my left, Francesca Lafante, Deputy Presiding Member. Further to my left, John Syne, Specialist Member. And further to John's left, Councillor Raj Doshi, Local Government Member, DAP Member, City of Perth. And on screen, we have Councillor Liam Gobbert, Local Government DAP Member, also from the City of Perth. We have at item 2, apologies from Councillor Bruce Reynolds, Local Government DAP Member, City of Perth. Item 3, members in leave of absence, none. Item 4, noting of minutes. Minutes from previous meetings are available on the DAP website. We only have part B today for the City of Perth, and in addition to our panel members, we have officers and technical advisors in the room, applicants and submitters. First, I will seek a declaration of due consideration from panel members. If I could see a show of hands to confirm that they've duly considered all the documentation within Part B of the agenda and Part B related information. Thank you. All have given due consideration. Next, I'll move to disclosures of interest and invite members to declare any disclosures of interest for this meeting. Just ask the elected members, was the matter considered at council? No. However, I think you've informed me of an impartiality interest, given that there was a briefing given to you from the officers about the process for the DAP application. Can I, in that regard, hear that you are not bound by any previous discussions and so forth? Face this with an open mind. Thank you. In that respect, then, I don't believe these impartiality interests prevent you from participating or voting in relation to the DAP meeting, DAP applications at this meeting. So we'll now move ahead to item 3 and the Form 1 DAP applications and presentations associated with that. Item 3.1 is for lots 100 and 101 Hay Street Mall and lots 976, 977 Wellington Street in Perth, and a number of other lots as well. It's a proposed demolition of existing development and associated structures and constructions of a 22 and 35-storey mixed-use development containing hotels, student accommodation, retail and dining uses, and third-party advertising signage and associated parking. It is, in other words, the Carillion redevelopment. Now, I've allowed 3 presentations this morning, and in accordance with DAP standing orders, presentations are limited strictly to 3 minutes, and there's been no extension of time granted to any of these presenters. So presenters are encouraged to focus on the main aspects and to verbally present within that designated 3-minute time frame. I will remind you when you get close to time. Please, therefore, can we focus only on the planning issues? I know some of the presentations have gone much further than that, but we're only interested in the planning issues. We don't make these matters personal in nature. We stick to the development application. So if I find that there are other issues arising, I will cut in and bring people back to focus on those planning issues. And then after we've had those presentations, panel members will be invited to respond to questions by members of the panel. And after we've heard from the presenters, we'll refer to the officers who I will introduce at that time, and the panel will ask those officers questions. So first of all, our presenter is Mr. Steve Walker, who is presenting against the RAR recommendation. You're here in person. If you'd like to sit up to the chair there, thank you, Mr. Walker. And you will have heard my introduction. Please rest assured, we've given declaration, we have read the entirety of your presentation. So if you can keep it concise to just the planning issues, that would be brilliant. Thank you.
Steve Walker, public submitter. Hello, Development Assessment Panel. Please refuse the proposal. Massively disappointed to find out an Australian property investment company and its national and international consultants have ignored the people of Perth in this proposed redevelopment of Carillion City Arcades. Advertising of the new proposal was substandard, and yet many of the submitters objected to major parts of the proposal. City of Perth planning assessors, Mr. Forrest, 58 Company, Urbis Sales Messages, SOM, and all other paid consultants have given up on the Perth major malls, in contrast to unpaid myself. All paid, yet they have given up by lumping an insultful proposal like this on Perth's major CBD pedestrian malls. Perth and its people are being traded away. Disagree with all the claims that the development deserves incentives and bonuses. Does not deserve. The proposed hotel on Hay Street Mall is too large. The purpose-built student accommodation tower on Murray Street Mall is inappropriate and wrong. There are many more land uses that should and could have gone there. Appendix F image illustrates it all. Large Murray Street Mall, yet the student accommodation tower dominates the area, bearing down on Forest Place, which the City of Perth DAP documents refer to as the Civic Place. The fanciful claims that students now aged 14 from afar are going to land in Perth years from now at this site and cultivate the identity of Perth, the brand of Perth, the soul of Perth, is ridiculous. They are not aware, they do not care. They will play by their own rules. This is a significant site to the people of Perth. The people of Perth should be put first, not last. You might be thinking, why show up today if it is imminent that all the paid parties have succeeded in their lobbying and lying?
Excuse me. Can you retract that last word and stick to the planning issues? Thank you.
It's imminent that the parties have succeeded in their efforts. It is so years from now, I can tell people that I was here today and saw the mistake happen right in front of me. There is nothing for the panel to fear from refusing this development application. The company will not go insolvent or bankrupt. They have the time to work on new and better proposals for such socially historic sites. A great step would be them involving and not excluding the people of Perth. There are many reasons to refuse this application. Please refuse. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Walker. Just stay there for a minute if you wouldn't mind, because there might be some questions. I'll just check. Councillor Gorbett, did you have any questions of Mr. Walker? No, thank you. Any panel members in the room? Any questions of Mr. Walker? Not today, thank you. But please remain for the rest of the meeting and take a seat. Thank you very much. Next speaker is Tim Dawkins of Urbis, who is speaking in support of the RAR recommendation. He's here in person. We also have Christopher Barrow of 58, who is also speaking in support of the RAR recommendation in person. And those people have been granted 3 minutes each to make that presentation. Also, we have Natalie Esser from 58 available for questions afterwards, and Ariana Rodriguez from SOM Architects, who is online for questions afterwards, but the last two are not granted presentations. So if Tim and Christopher would like to come forward, thank you. Again, as with the previous, you can reverse the order if you wish, but as per the previous speaker, I will invite you to stick strictly to your 3 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Karen. Chris Barrow, Project Director at 58. We would like to thank and acknowledge all the stakeholders who have engaged collaboratively with the project team over the planning process. We're pleased and generally support the responsible authorities' report and recommendation to approve the Carillion development, and so we now look forward to a positive assessment by the DAP. I'll pass to Tim, who will just raise a couple of the conditions that we would like to be reviewed as part of this assessment process.
Pardon me. My name is Tim Dawkins. I'm a director at Irvis, and we're the planning consultant for the applicant for this application. Chris, I don't have anything but that to Chris's comments, but I'd like to reiterate the fact that there was a detailed assessment process and the willingness of City of Perth officers to genuinely engage and work productively is greatly appreciated. We're very comfortable with the RAR and the way the development is characterised. Overall, the conditions are relevant and reasonable, but we would like to see a few changes as outlined in the memo which has been attached to the agenda. Quickly go through those conditions now. So condition 8, pardon me, condition 8 relates to the access through the site. The wording isn't quite sufficient for us. There is a development plan agreement, which is under the Forest Place Management Act. There's legislation in place to maintain these things. So realistically, we just want this to be a backstop to any instances where that might change or be rescinded in the future. We think that's very unlikely. We don't think it's going to occur, but if it did disappear, we'd like to say that the minimum requirements would be 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. Monday to Friday. But in any instance, the DPA would continue to control access to the site as it has done for many years. Condition 14, this is just a technical thing, and I think the city may have issued an update. But it's just the way the Perth Parking Management Act characterises car parking bays. It excludes acro bays, but generally speaking, in planning world, we include parking bays, the acro bays. So we just want to reference the 24, noting that it is also one of them is an acro bay, just to align the two different pieces of legislation as well to make it clear. Condition 20, we don't think this condition is clear or certain. There's no definition of what a low level of luminance is. It's unclear what would constitute flickering, pulsating, flashing lights. There is a condition 18 which requires a signage management plan, and that plan was provided in draft form, which will be a living, breathing document which can be updated and managed over time. Talks about a specific level of illumination, 7,000 nits, but that also talks about different times of day and night when the illumination is appropriate. So we think this condition actually should just fold into the condition 18, which would be part of that plan. We're happy for it to be an advice note. But we think it's a type of thing, and there's a whole range of things that are addressed in the signage management plan, which are also there. We had previously sought condition 19 to be the same, but we're happy to accept that condition 19 is actually specific and clear, and we think that although we do think it should be in the management, we're happy to accept for it to be a condition because it is a thing that can be, everyone can understand what's required by that condition. Condition 32. We believe that this element of the application is clearly documented and has formed part of the considerations throughout the consideration and design review. As noted in the RAR, the realignment of Padbury Walk improves legibility for pedestrians moving through Forest Chase. And there's a discussion on it, but it doesn't actually really explain the purpose of this condition. So we're not exactly sure what the purpose of this condition is.
Your 3 minutes, Tim. So
it's a normal part of the documentation. And then condition 2, advice note 2 is simply relates to plot ratio. And the plot ratio is really about, if plot ratio in City of Perth is something that is very tightly controlled, if there is through the documentation process an ability to find a little bit of extra space, so like a corridor gets turned into a habitable room, that's additional plot ratio would have to come back to the city for an extra 2 square metres, say. So we're just saying for internal changes, there should be an ability to accommodate that. We are eligible for a 20% bonus. It was awarded on both previous applications for this site. We haven't asked for that bonus plot ratio. We probably don't need it. We're just hoping that there is a way to make sure that the post condition clearance documentation is there.
all right, thank you very much. Now I will invite questions of you, and for ease, we'll start with Councillor Liam Gobbett on screen. Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you very much, Chair. Tim, I appreciate this might be a little technical in nature, but I've previously sought advice from the department through to the city as regarding the level of illumination. Would you be comfortable if the amendment, if there was an amendment to that condition that gave the effect of illumination levels complying with Australian Standard 4282-2023? Is that something that you'd be willing to accept?
Yes, that's exactly the standard we state in our management plan, the Science Management Plan, which we've initiated in the city. So that's a relevant standard that we would be applying. It's more about being able to deal with it, because we think this condition is probably comes from a situation where traffic consideration. So obviously we don't want to be distracted drivers and things like that in a typical space when you have them on the freeway or other instances. This is a very unique circumstance where there is actually, this sign is probably not going to be visible from the vehicle. So we think that standard is fine. But the specification around all the clarity around pulsating, flashing, illuminating is unclear. Say, as an example, we show the AFL Grand Final on these lights. Would the broadcast of that flashing, pulsating lights? I don't know, but I feel like it's, as a condition, it's not appropriate. It should be as part of the management plan.
Right, thank you. Further questions, Councillor Gobbert? Okay, thank you. We'll come back to you if you do. Councillor Doshi, did you have any questions of the applicant? Okay, thank you. Mr. Fante, did you have some questions?
Yes, I have some questions. Thank you for your presentation. My first question is primarily relating to the conditions, the changes you've requested. The first one you refer to is modification of condition 8, and in your material you've talked about changing timeframes from a close of the public pedestrian link to 12 p.m. Now, the reason you've given for that is that you are essentially seeking to future-proof something that may or may not happen that's dealt with in another piece of legislation. So my question are twofold. The commentary you've given is based on another piece of legislation, but the proposal we have in front of us talks about the significance of the pedestrian access way, the opening up of the pedestrian access way, accessibility to the sky, range of uses, all pointing to the significance that you say the proposal has a much broader, stronger use through the day and evening, hence the 12 p.m. continued close. On planning basis, and you have a mix of uses in land uses that are temporary land uses in terms of the hotel and the student accommodation. From a planning perspective, why would we consider a variation to a time frame? There's essentially two reasons. One, the planning form that you've talked about and the rationale. And two, there's a piece of legislation and we would not typically seek to preempt an outcome of another piece of legislation.
So I'll let Chris speak to it as well, but the original wording of the condition could be construed as being forever, like 24 hours a day. And we didn't think the condition that's stated in the RAR is, we think that's over and above the DPA. I believe the city might come back with some hours in their response to our memo. I'm not sure if that's circulated, but basically we want them to be aligned in effect. It's difficult if there's two rules that apply to the site that are inconsistent. So given there is one that guides us, we feel that that's sufficient to control the hours of access, which is till midnight. And it's not 24 hours a day as may be taken from the condition as worded currently in the RAR, but should that fall away for whatever reason, which is particularly unlikely, we think there should be a backstop, and the backstop is the hours and we're happy to consider other hours that the panel might suggest, but we just think that's minimum standard for a Monday night when there might not be any shops open. Obviously the restaurants and things are going to open later, and we're not going to close it off when restaurants are opening. It just sets a minimum standard.
Thank you for that. Can I continue?
Yes, please do.
I have a question that sort of comes out of condition 20, but it is actually a broader matter and it goes to land use. So I'm sort of dovetailing them both together, but I'll probably speak first on the land use question. The material we have in front of us talks about land use of signage being an unlisted use. And the plans show us that the scale of that signage and the material in the row is substantial, both viewing out to Murray Street. The documentation that you have provided talks to what the signage is going to be used for, and there's some general language, I can't pinpoint for you right this very moment, in your documentation about the material that's going to be displayed on it. It is third-party advertising. My question, quite specifically, is this just general advertising into what is a significant public meeting place, Forest Place, and or does it include, as suggested in your material, other forms of non-general advertising for the occupants of the complex? That's my first question. And my second part is, how is that controlled? And my third part is, why should we grant a significant variation of size on that particular element in the context of my first two questions?
I think you are correct, Francesca, that the sign is for commercial purposes, and it does provide an activated edge to the Forest Place, which is a civic space. We will be able to provide further detail once we have engaged with an operator to operate those screens. There will be a commercial element to it. There will be opportunity for non-commercial elements to it. But until we go and have an agreement with a third-party operator, those details are not with us at the moment.
So in that context, that doesn't then align with conditions that are proposed to us in the documents we have in front of us that require a level of other opportunities, non-commercial, to form part of the community benefit in the public realm to support a variation. So what would you say about a more specific requirement in condition requiring a specific amount of time or space? And I'm going to have a similar question to the officers, that ensures the elements of signage also relative to place, and I'm specifically talking about Forest Place and the activities that occur on there, which is a meeting place and a gathering place, festivals, events, a whole variety of other things that go on there that are not just walking past or general commercial activities.
Mind if I just clarify with this question to your question? You're saying there's some conditions in here which you're saying which don't would be like.
It's the process that we need to go through to satisfy ourselves under the requirements of the scheme that this, as a use not listed, can be considered and approved as part of this application. So we need to assure ourselves that there is appropriate considerations as to the contribution that this makes, given it's a use not listed.
The conditions talk about things like a signage strategy. There is a very broad element in a signage strategy, but this is a significant both use and scale of variation. And from my perspective, the element is quite unresolved in the language of the document, and the submission we have doesn't provide any greater detail on what is in practice a significant variation to that space. So that's what I'm trying to get is more clarity about the certainty of the community return on such a significant variation in that space.
Well, there is no agreement to a certain number. We haven't actually come to that yet. But the agreement is to provide a really thriving mall space and a destination space. It connects the two failing malls, but two malls that people could be performing better than they are, and bringing people into a space and signifying for guests and visitors as a legibility thing. This is a place of activity. This is a place of where you come to gather. And this is where you come to make a decision as to your next move into the city. So you're coming from Central Station, perhaps, or from the Busport underground train station. It's a natural beacon for people to come and be attracted to that point. And then they can be dragged through the site. They can be dragged up east and west. But it's really about saying this is a place of activity. And we've forensically gone through the signage policy. It's quite a new policy the City of Perth have. And it actually talks about, this is probably one of the only spots where this type of signage would be appropriate in the entirety of the City of Perth. I don't know if I could think of another spot where it actually would be appropriate. It's not visible from vehicles. It's not interrupting the traffic flow. Certainly no thing about the confusion with traffic lights and things like that. So the actual sign itself is about trying to make sure that it draws people through the site, and that's why they're split into two, to take them through the gorge, or through the split in the development, to bring people in and welcome to the city in a natural way that cities, I guess, around the world do these sorts of things. It's not an unusual thing for a major tourism spot to have this type of activity as part of it.
I'll just see if
It's on the same matter.
is it the same thing?
It's the same matter. So sorry. So can you just explain to me a bit more detail what the nexus is between a big commercial sign and the sorts of behaviour changes or activation that you're talking about? Because it's not immediately clear that one is connected to the other. You say that there's lots of circuses and Times Squares where this sort of thing happened. Equally, there's a lot of very active places around the world where it doesn't. So what's the essential element of this in this very prominent location that would mean that this very substantial change to a policy, which is, as you say, is a fairly recent one, should be even contemplated?
Well, first of all, I don't think it's a very substantive change to the policy. We did forensically go through it with the city, and it does actually, there seems to be a presumption against in people's minds. When you actually read through the policy, it's actually very appropriate. So I do reject that notion. But it's a shopping centre essentially with other things above it, but it's a shopping precinct that, let's face it, has failed, but it's about trying, hasn't performed to the required standards over time. It's about trying to create this as a place that is where people want to go and it's to be attracted to. The city has struggled with the competition from the shopping centres in the region. So all the other regional shopping centres have been expanded dramatically, and the City of Perth hasn't. It's not the destination. It's not the decision-making place where you come to do shopping at.
That answered your question?
No, it hasn't even come close to it. I mean, there's lots of reasons why we can say about why the city has got some sort of retail issues, and that might have to do with how many people actually live around the place. But you haven't really answered my question about what the essential element of a signage is to that sort of activation. I mean, people don't travel from the other side of the city to see a sign in Forest Place.
No. But it provides a general sense of, as a ground zero, for want of a better word, that this is the centre part of the city where the activity is. It's a wayfinding tool to help people understand in and around us. That's the best I can explain. But it's not an unusual thing, and it's certainly not compatible with the policy that's being adopted.
Okay.
Back to you, Mr. Conte.
Thank you. Condition 32, Padbury Walk details. There's a request that it be deleted. My question is twofold, or a couple of elements to it. What changes of Padbury Walk are required to facilitate this development, either in its finished form or in its construction development stages? And I note on the plans you show a reduction in the width. I got a question to the officers about that. So could you explain to me how this development is connected or relies on the current structure that is Padbury Walk?
So thanks, Francesca. So the Padbury Walk forms part of the DPA. So there's a ongoing connection between the upper deck at Forest Chase across to Carillion. As part of this redevelopment, we're looking to realign that Padbury Walk bridge to create a direct alignment back through to the train station. So it's a very important link. It connects from the train station cultural centre across through to Carillion and then ongoing down through to St George's Terrace. It does provide visual clutter to what is regarded, or we regard as, the civic place of Perth, and by realigning that creates a much straighter, more direct line across the Forest Chase down through to the station. And so, yes, that is the main change. There was some documentation that indicates that it's a smaller in width. We can assess that as part of the next phase of design.
So
It also removes the pillars in the mall, which are holding the bridge up. This will be fully suspended, so it's much better from a set and safety and visibility point of view.
So in that context, what are you asking from us as the decision makers about Padbury Walk in your context that you've already indicated about other legislation? Are you asking for a position on us in terms of its relocation? Are you asking, what is your request in relation to specifically Padbury Walk?
Nothing. It just the condition doesn't seem to have a purpose. It's shown on the plans, and it's discussed in the RR as being an improvement for pedestrian accessibility. So we don't know why that aspect is particularly drilled down upon, when it would be a normal part of the documentation to clarify all these things. You know, we're going through the condition clearance for a whole bunch of really massive buildings, and they all require details and things. I just don't know what detail.
Just have a follow-up to that, if I may. Reading through some of the submissions during advertising, and particularly, I suppose they were couched as objections to the proposal. There was obviously some concern, I presume, from operators and tenancies and businesses along the walkway there as to how through this development things would tie in, how it would impact their frontage, how it would impact the levels, the materiality, whether, as Ms. Lafanti said, I think going from 5 point whatever plus meters to 4.5 meters, whether that was sufficient for the amount of pedestrian traffic anticipated, and whether that would impact. So from that point of view, why do you feel it is unreasonable that condition 32 should ask for the final details of Padbury Walk relocation, including details of associated amendments to the Forest Chase walkway and adjoining areas being submitted to the city for approval prior to the relevant building permit? Because I think, Mr. Barrow, you just mentioned that you were still contemplating the dimensions of that. So it would seem that you are still in the design development process, and this condition is simply asking prior to building permit for the outcome of that design development to be submitted and approved.
Yeah. We actually have no issue with the condition. It just seems weird that it's narrowed, drilled down on that aspect of the development when all of the development will go through this design development as part of the building permit and condition clearance. So it is of little consequence, just doesn't seem to have a purpose.
Well, we can refer to the officers on that, but thank you for your response. Sorry to interrupt you, Ms. Lafanti, please continue.
Thank you. My final one is your request for modification of advice note 2 plot ratio. You made a statement today that you believe the changes have earned the full bonus plot ratio. Could you elaborate further? Typically, a determination of this panel is on a set of plans in front of us, and why would we grant additional floor space in whichever manner you refer to it, bonus plot ratio or otherwise, outside of the set of plans that we have in front of us? There are mechanisms for amendments to any development. So why would we, as a principle on this proposal that we've got in front of us, both as a principle but also with this proposal specifically, grant variation? And that's not a 2 square metre variation that you noted in your commentary. This is quite a significant amount of floor space in terms of the difference.
So that just replicates the condition or the advancement that we had on the previous 2 approvals, which was granted the full 20%. This is a fast, more substantial, or more, it's a better resolution of the site, and so but it's been granted half as much, simply because we only asked for half as much, which you're correct in stating. It's only about the difficulties, because there's a whole bunch of exceptions that apply for internal alterations. So if we merge an apartment into two, perhaps, or or something becomes plot ratio isn't. We have to come back to this panel or the city under Reg 17A to get 1 or 2 square meters or 10 or whatever it is. It's not about changing the built form in any form. It's about what is the actual plot ratio that exists on the site. If there's a storage area some area that's not plot ratio in the basement, it's exempt from planning approval. But we can't achieve it because that number exists as an advice note. It just seems to be in the way. So the way we've cast that advice note is basically to say that it's only about internal alterations and it's not about changing the built form in any way. But if some piece of area becomes plot ratio, we think that should be a simple process rather than having to go through a full development application for an internal alteration that can't see it from the outside or anything. We don't know any of those areas, but we did through the process have a lot of scrutiny over the areas which are plot ratio, and the city came back to us and said, by the way, although in most schemes storage is exempt from plot ratio, in our scheme it's not. So we had to add all that in. And if there is some sort of documentation error where a wall's moved, we're just worried I'm worried. I think I'm the only one that's worried, to be honest. That it might end up being the plans might change once we go through detailed documentation, add some more plot ratio, cause us to come back to change an advice note, and whether you can change an advice note is questionable anyway. Can a Reg 17A even change an advice note? I'm not sure.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Sy, further questions?
Yes, if I could go back to condition 8. I can understand a reference to the DPA, but I'm confused as to why we should start to contemplate the circumstances or if this ceases to have an effect. I mean, it's a nice idea, but really this is well beyond the sorts of things that we should be worrying ourselves about, surely.
So in the very simplest terms, we just requested a references the same hours or the same requirements of the DPA.
So the DPA says 6 until midnight and you're saying 7 until 9. Why should we have any different?
We just don't know how that space gets managed. And if the DPA fails, yeah, look, it's not a big deal to us. We actually think it's very unlikely, but we actually think that with students coming to the site, with hotel guests and other things, being able to make sure that space gets managed appropriately means that it can be secured at some point, which best reflects as the security protocols of the needs.
The DPA allows you to do that.
Correct.
So if we didn't have that particular sentence in there, it might be a fair bit safer, mightn't it?
Is that it? Okay. I have some questions for you. Advice note 4 indicates, as to your plans, that you're working outside of lots 100 and 101. Would that require other landowner signatures to come into this DA? And so they've all been provided. Okay, thank you. That's my first question. There've been some, this is just an aside in a sense, but obviously you're referring to it as the Carillion Centre. There were some questions through the submissions about the bells, whether you have a view on what will happen to those and whether they will still be a feature of and still named the Carillion Centre.
I mean, branding and naming, we'll work through that in due course. The Carillion bells are not heritage listed, and they're not part of the development proposal going forward. However, if there is interest in the bells, we can work with the interested party to have them removed as part of the redevelopment.
That's okay. Thank you for that. Now, further reading through all the submissions as well, and we've covered the pedestrian walkway, but there was some concerns about how the development would actually tie into the chase, the levels, different awning, positioning and materiality. And I don't know if this is for you or one for Ms. Rodriguez to respond to, but how you're considering how seamless that might be.
We just tried to promote her, but she's declining. So.
Oh, okay. Well, then that's a question for you.
We're just going to try again, but I'm not sure. She won't be able to speak unless she accepts it. It's just declined again. So.
Okay,
So there was some discussion through the design review process with the design review panel and the City of Perth. As part of our submission, we provided a lot of documentation about how our current podium reflects the nature of Hay Street Mall, and for Murray Street Mall, we have definitely taken into consideration the level changes between our site, Murray Street, Hay Street. We've definitely taken into account the awning levels on adjacent, I think it's Zara, and on the other side, Flight Centre, and same thing with the Lavissa and on Hay Street Mall. So
She's online now if you.
So as part of our development process, we certainly have taken into account, and that's been certainly documented throughout the submission and all the documentation that we've provided today.
all right, thank you for that. Welcome, Ariana. I have a question. Again, looking at some of the submissions, there were questions around the loading docks specifically, and whether there was adequacy for two-way traffic and an interpretation of the work that Stantec have done. I wonder, can you confirm for me how all of that servicing and loading will work, and if it still allows for the amount of traffic that's anticipated, or if there are other circulation proposals?
Of course, yeah. There's been studies done by Stantec to ensure that all of the loading can operate within the loading dock that we have provided, and that means that we have done swept paths to test that the trucks can turn in and out cleanly within that loading dock area to be able to have everything operating there separate to the circulation area within the parking zone, and the circulation area in the parking zone is for a truck in and a truck out. So that all has been tested, and I'm sure the implementation can be provided if required, but those studies have happened coordinating both traffic but also structures to ensure that the proposal is strong enough that we can ensure that it can continue forward.
All right, thank you.
Just on that, so yeah, Stantec did do a swept path analysis to ensure that we can get vehicles in and out. I did read the comment around the concern around traffic. Without the tunnel, all our loading and servicing goes out of Forest Place. With the tunnel, we can now start relocating that service and deliveries out of Forest Place into a Carillion basement. And with the swept paths demonstrated as part of the traffic impact assessment, we can certainly demonstrate that is likely to have a positive impact on what would be a busy loading dock if we didn't have the tunnel in place.
Okay, thank you. Just one last question, if I may, and that's about the demolition and the construction process. How is that likely to impact Forest Place, or how is that to be handled? Does additional land area need to be taken for offices and so on and so forth, or is it all sort of reasonably well contained?
Yeah, so we will look to engage a contractor, and then they'll start drafting up the construction management plan, logistics management plan. We're certainly aware, and we've had some initial conversations with the City of Perth around maintaining access through at least one or both of the malls at all times, or at times when we're not doing construction works, to obviously construct things like tunnels under Murray Street Mall. There will be a requirement to have certain areas cordoned off for the construction activities. But once those activities are completed, then those access ways are reopened. We will obviously work with the city to ensure that whatever our construction management plan and logistics plan ensures that we try to have as little impact on the City of Perth. However, noting a development of this scale, we need to have access to it, and currently there is no vehicle access to our site.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
We'll work with our city.
All right, thank you. I'll just check that there are no other questions from panel members before we move ahead, not from Councillor Gobbert. Councillor, good, you can take your seat again. Thank you very much. Now we refer to the officers. Do you want to pop up to this area here? The officers that we have available to ask questions of, we have Julia Kingsbury, Roberto Lalilo, Craig Smith and Michael Croak. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
Okay, lovely, thank you. So I'll now go to panel members to ask questions. Councillor Gobbett, did you have questions of officers? No. Councillor Doshi? No. Okay, Ms Lafante, questions of officers?
Thank you. My questions are probably also for you to provide a response against some of those matters that I raised with the applicant, particularly conditions of post-interest land use of signage and the scale of that signage and the terms of the condition that deal with both the material on the signage. And so really my question to you is, this is a substantial element in a significant location, significant public location for activity more than just walking through the space. What are the controls on material, the size? I know the size is one aspect, but particularly the material in terms of public. You have particular considerations on it. Documentation of the applicant talks about it also being tourism or broader West Australian references. I don't see that necessarily in the terms of the condition or in the right. Could you respond to that aspect, please?
Certainly, thank you for the question. The signage component of the development was, I suppose, a significant aspect of our assessment. You might see through some of the discussion about the history, the city requested a lot more information in regards to the signage to get some more certainty about what it was and what it was proposing to show. The city's recently reviewed its local planning policy in relation to the signs, as mentioned by the applicant. And one of the key triggers to the review was in relation to how the city considered digital and third-party advertising. Obviously, we understand the big shift in regards to that, and the changes to the policy were to reiterate what the city's, I suppose, position is on signage, that primarily it's there to support businesses within the city and for wayfinding purposes, but also making a key link between signage as to how it's viewed at pedestrian level and by pedestrians, and on the basis that that is in regards to creating cities as places for the people. So we saw that there is an opportunity that signs can contribute to places for people if they're done and located appropriately. So that's just a bit in regards to the signs policy. To that effect, the city looked at the size of the location of these types of signs where we would say that they are appropriate to give the industry some certainty in terms of where the city would accept these. And they were generally at that sort of pedestrian level. They were obviously then at a smaller scale, and the focus was in locations where people would congregate and, you know, and linger and enjoy that space. So the other side of that is that they're not just aimed at drivers of vehicles or passengers in vehicles to capture, I suppose, a commercial advertising opportunity. So in that regard, the policy specifies key locations and sizes that we believe are appropriate. This proposal, the site is located within an area that is identified in the policy as being potentially appropriate for such signage, and critically it also is proposed on the Murray Street Mall facade, which faces a key public space being Forest Place. So I suppose it satisfies the specific policy requirements in regards to its location where such signage could be appropriate. It was then particularly in regards to the size of the sign, and as you know, it's significantly larger than what was considered acceptable under the signs policy, which is generally about 20 square metres, given that they're usually located sort of lower on the buildings and the proportions, etc. The city's policy built in some criteria that would allow officers and decision makers to support signs that didn't meet those requirements in, I suppose, exceptional circumstances where they delivered an outcome and on their merits they were considered appropriate for that location. So that's where I suppose we've assessed the sign against that criteria. So that covers, I suppose, the principles and the objectives for that neighbourhood, which in very brief summary, I suppose it's to create a lively and active and attractive environment focused particularly on pedestrians. There was no concerns from our point of view in terms of having an amenity impact on residents particularly. Obviously the signs don't face back towards the proponent's own towers, which do have occupants, even though they are for a shorter period of time. We believe, subject to some final details, the signs, they have been carefully considered in terms of the design of the proposal. They've been considered as part of the initial design. It's not like they are a later addition and they're sort of blocking, integral parts of the architecture, etc. They have been considered, and as explained by the applicant, because of the pedestrian link in the middle, the signs also sort of curve around and follow that flow. One of the key considerations is in regards to who they're aimed at, and in this regard, they are primarily aimed at pedestrians. It's not obviously adjacent to a road, so that was a key consideration. I suppose our biggest sort of consideration and assessment was really about how it did or didn't dominate the facade and dominate the place. So I suppose in our considerations, Forest Place is a large civic square. It's bound by some heritage buildings on one side and then some contemporary buildings on the other. The recent redevelopment of we'll call it the Maya complex, that obviously changed the facade and the nature of that building. There is some digital signage as part of that. I don't think it's on typically, but there is some digital signage facing Forest Place. And I suppose we were satisfied that it could make a contribution to making that space a little bit more lively and active. Particularly then in response to your question about the content, we've considered it, I suppose, at the worst case scenario, that it would be just used for third-party advertising. The applicants explained to us that it's likely to advertise businesses on site, and there would be an opportunity for community sort of advertising, streaming of events, etc., that would help sort of, I suppose, make a contribution. As explained today, fuel and operator is sought. Final details of that haven't been considered. To that effect, the city's incorporated conditions of approval which deal with, I suppose, the design and the content regarding the impact on sort of amenity. That's where the luminance sort of conditions come in. Appreciate that it's not directed at traffic, but we've all seen examples of signs where the luminance levels are too high and they do actually create a bit of an amenity issue. But the main condition is really in relation to the submission of a signage management plan. So that's condition 18. I know there was a condition raised which was about the signage strategy. Thank you. That was particularly in relation to, I suppose, signage for the entire development. So 10-inch signage throughout, that there's a coordinated approach to signage. That's what that sort of standard condition typically controls. So it's condition 18 that would require the submission of a final management plan, which we expect to get the detail of the content of the sign. Our policy doesn't specify whether a percentage of it should be for community advertising. My advice would be if that's something that the panel is interested in including, that possibly amendments to that condition could be made to incorporate a percentage of that. The city used to do that in the past. It can be done successfully. Depending on the signage, is sometimes hard to control in terms of compliance, etc. But we are of the understanding that there is a commitment to, I suppose, use the development and the screens to enhance the public space that's immediately adjacent to their building, and that has a benefit for them as well. So I suppose the way we've considered the land use being an unlisted use is in relation to the matters to be considered under the regulations, because our signage policy is quite prescriptive in regards to where these signs are considered appropriate. Our assessment relies heavily then on the application of the signage policy. And as mentioned by the proponent, this is probably a rare situation where the signs are located where you know, the city is, I suppose, accepting that they would actually have a benefit to a locality.
Okay, thank you for that. Other questions?
So can I just clarify, this is a substantial size variation, which you talked about in exceptional circumstances, lively environment. Does the city hold the position that general advertising does that? I mean, it's quite a substantial third-party general advertising, and you talked about commitment of applicant, but the conditions don't give certainty or anything other than general advertising into that public community activity and space. Your assessment is comfortable that general advertising of facilities in the building warrants such a significant variation in size of an unlisted use?
So you're right, our policy nor the conditions will provide certainty that any component of the signage would be based towards community advertising or tenant signage, apart from the commitment from the proponents. I suppose we've considered the size of the sign in relation to the development, its proportions and its scale. The fact that it is located directly opposite Forest Place, where Forest Place opens up to the mall. It's the unique site in the Murray Street Mall, where it doesn't have a direct sort of building across the road. Across the mall, it has a large public square, which I suppose gives it a greater context that a larger sign is considered more appropriate. I suppose the signage itself, the fact that it's digital, it's got the capacity to be variable as well as animated, because there's no traffic concerns, particularly at night time. We do believe it has the potential to help activate the area despite its content. I suppose you know, we do hope and we expect the proponent will incorporate other signage within the sign, but the worst case scenario, we do conclude in this situation under these unique circumstances that it does, even if it is only for advertising.
Do you have any comments in relation to the modifications requested in condition 8?
Yes, I do, and I suppose the basis of the condition is that the application included a request for bonus plot ratio, and the request was on the basis of the provision of a public link. And our assessment is that public link has a key and significant public benefit that warrants I suppose warrants the awarding of additional floor space for this development. Now, typically a public link, a public space, you know, we would want to maximise the availability and the accessibility of that space for the public for the longest period of time, for 24 hours ideally, but the city also recognises that particularly in the instance where the area is not highly active, particularly in after hours, that there is a level of security, and typically these links do need to be secured and closed during particular times. It also helps with maintenance and other bits and pieces and cleaning. So the condition is imposed to ensure that there is ongoing public access to the link, that never falls away, and that's I suppose out of the awarding of bonus plot ratio. The city acknowledges that the condition as worded currently may imply or could be interpreted that 24-hour access is what's wanted. That's not what was intended. So the applicant clarified with the city that the proposed hours for opening would be 6 a.m. to 12 midnight, which is consistent with the DPA. The city accepted those hours and considered them appropriate for the awarding of a bonus plot ratio. Ordinarily, we would require a developer to secure that arrangement, whether it's through a public access easement, some other legal agreement. In this instance, as per the advice note, the city is happy to accept that the DPA provides that assurance and is likely to provide that for a very, very long time. The condition's been imposed in the event that the requirements of the DPA, for whatever reason, might fall away, that we secure that outcome because a bonus in plot ratio has been awarded. We would be happy to modify the condition to make a specific mention of the hours that the city expects the link to be open, and that's 6 a.m. to 12 midnight. When we're not supportive of the change from 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. because that's not what was proposed and that's not what was considered in regards to the assessment of the bonus. So I think we've drafted a new condition which just inserts those hours so that there is no uncertainty in terms of what's expected.
So, sorry, don't think that has been circulated to us.
I don't think it's been circulated to the DAP, no, my apologies.
So does that relate to, on condition 8, I've got it here in front of me, it says, third line down, it says on the site for 364 days out of the year, comma, would the words be being between 6 a.m. and 12 midnight, providing certainty? So I would only add those 3 words with the written consent of the city being first obtained.
Correct.
Just add in, is that what you're intending there?
Yes, we had it before, I suppose, the 364 days, but either it's just inserting.
Okay, so you cite 4.
Yep.
Site comma between 6 a.m. and
6 a.m. to 12
midnight for 360. Okay, see, I see what you're talking about. Okay.
that requirement.
Thank you. My next question relates to plot ratio, and it's actually an advice note, and you've heard my earlier comment pre-relation to the changes. Do you have any comments you wish to make on that matter?
We agree with the comments by yourself and the panel to date. We also have only considered and are supportive of the proposal as considered on the proposed plans, and that uses the amount of floor space that is specified, and that's what the city considered in regards to awarding plot ratio, as well as then supporting the built form outcome. I do understand the concerns of the applicant. Plot ratio at the city, I suppose, is one of our strictest controls, and we use it well as a development incentive. So hence anything above the permitted maximum, there is a threshold to achieve to get a public outcome to warrant a bonus. In this regard, a 9.5% bonus was all that was sought, which was all that was assessed and considered, and therefore that's all that we're willing to propose, which is consistent with the plans that we'll be approving. As mentioned, there is a way of amending the proposal should, through detailed design, there are changes in floor space. That's not uncommon, not unusual. Most of the time it ends up being roughly the same by the time they change a few things. If for whatever reason additional plot ratio is required, then the proponent can lodge an amended application and we can work through that.
Thank you. Can I continue?
Yes, please.
My next question is to do with land use, specifically the accommodation components, student accommodation and hotel. I note that material you have provided us and in your scheme documentation, they are permitted land uses. I also note that we have received in submissions concerns about the activation of that portion of the city through those particular land uses. Do you have any comments you wish to make in relation to why these land uses are the most appropriate as part of the mix of uses? I note that the ground levels have both food and beverage and retail. Could you speak to that aspect in terms of land use?
Certainly. So we've considered, I suppose, the mix of land uses in regards to how they can work together on site, and then also their potential impacts as well as their benefits to the broader context, and particularly the locality of the pedestrian malls. As you mentioned, all the land uses proposed are preferred land uses under our scheme. So our scheme does specify that there is the ability to refuse those land uses, just apply appropriate conditions to manage those land uses. The proposed retail, food and beverage and other sort of commercial land uses are considered acceptable. They're consistent with the city's vision under its current framework, plus its future framework, particularly its local planning strategy, to really, I suppose, enhance and maintain the retail focus of the pedestrian malls. So we do believe that the continued sort of provision of those types of uses, particularly on the lower levels and ground floor, will assist and help activate and regenerate the area. In regards to the accommodation uses, the hotel and the student accommodation, they are both preferred uses as long as they aren't located at ground floor. And typically that's because they're less active at ground floor, I suppose, unless you have the, communal areas, etc. But, in this prime location within our pedestrian malls, those retail and food and beverage uses are what the city is definitely encouraging, and those upper level uses can add additional benefits to the site and the broader locality. Particularly with these two land uses, the city's got a vision and direction to increase the population in the city. We've got pockets within different neighbourhoods that perform well in terms of encouraging residential development. The central city neighbourhood is one of those pockets where it's, I suppose, not doing and performing so well in terms of the provision of residential or accommodation type land uses. And I suppose we're very conscious, as I'm sure that the panel is, of the benefits of adding some of those land uses to these areas, particularly in this location. Those land uses, they have the potential and the benefit of increasing the activity during the day, but particularly then at night and on the weekends. There's approximately 1,000 beds, let's say, across the two uses. The injection of, I suppose, a population to that extent in the middle of the malls has a benefit to create some activity, whether it's passive in a sense of people just coming and going, whether it's active, whether they're using other commercial businesses, accessing amenities, travelling within the city, and the benefits of that is that it can help increase levels of safety and security, particularly at night time and on the weekends, and give some more critical mass to help support some of those key businesses that are located in the middle. I suppose our concern of those proposed uses is they rely heavily on how they're managed and serviced, particularly. And that's where the proponent has demonstrated to a satisfactory level that they can be managed without having any other impact on the mall. So particularly all the servicing occurring through the tunnel, straight into a dedicated service area within their basement, minimises, additional traffic within the malls to service those development, gives them, I suppose, a bit more flexibility in how they can service it. And also they don't generally, under our scheme and typically by nature, require much parking. So that's, again, one of the key things, the key differences, I suppose, behind getting some true residential in the city. They still provide a population, but it's a population that might have expectations of a lower level of amenity, whether they're holiday makers using the hotel, whether they're students, and sort of, I suppose, happy to be in that location where there's a bit more activity and vibrancy. So overall, we're very pleased with the mix of land uses. We think any potential impacts can be managed, but we think the benefit of the mix of land uses, particularly that injection of a population, will have a key benefit to the city.
Thank you. Those are all my questions.
Okay, thank you. Simon, did you have questions of the officers?
I do, and perhaps this is something Mr. Smith might be able to help us with. About the signage. Now, the signage at that scale will start to redefine the character of the Forest Place generally, it seems to me. Is that the sort of character that the city is comfortable with? Because it changes its nature in a fairly substantial way given its scale.
There's some truth in that, but the character will change. We conducted an internal project on Forest Place several years ago, and the primary outcomes of that were to improve the interface at end and to minimise the amount of clutter there was in the middle of Forest Place. That it actually became a much better multifunctional space than it has been. And the scale, yes, they're big signs. I guess my question from an architectural point of view is, if you have the size of those signs, would that fundamentally change the impact that they're going to have on the character of the place? And I don't think there's too much of a strong argument to say yes, that would make for the outcome. Don't forget that at that southern end, there are a lot of trees, and they will be either kept or replaced. Some of them are affected by the tunnel going through. And so from a pedestrian's point of view, our interface is in the closer sections, somewhat much, if you like, interfered with by those trees. So yes, it's a change. Yes, they're big signs. They're probably commensurate with similar setups in other cities. And there does seem to be, I have to say, there's a lot of pressure on the city to allow more and more of these types of signs. And quite a few of them have been rejected. They've been rejected by us or by main roads where they've affected traffic. These are not in that situation. And it really has, both in the current science policy and the previous version of the science policy, the same emphasis was on the idea that these larger and more active signage installs go in areas where people gather. And there's a fundamental difference between Forest Place and other places where we're being reasonably lenient on these sorts of signages, like in the Northbridge area, where people are there for nighttime entertainment and whatever. And the idea of signs in that location seems to be absolutely fine, but they're not of the same scale, and the places are not of the same scale as Forest Place. If I didn't quite get the question whether it was about whether this changes its civic function or not.
Whether it changes the character of the city, as it were, because it becomes a city where there's lots of illuminated signs, or a number of them in key locations. Right? I mean, there's quite a lot now around Yakin Square, for example. Now with this, there'll be quite a lot around Forest Place. Is that the sort of city that we want to proceed with? Or are there other directions the city might want to go, or is this specific to this area and it doesn't imply anything for anywhere else in other locations?
I think from a planning point of view, it might be best.
Yeah, if I can just jump in, I suppose the science policy does that. So it identifies key areas and locations that we believe the character would not be, I suppose, impacted, but still it will be improved by the inclusion of these. And typically they're in the entertainment precinct, so Northbridge, where we would, absolutely sort of encourage them to add to that character of the typical nightlife. And the policy also does talk about the retail core of the city as being a location where they could be considered appropriate. Our view is that Murray Street, let me clarify that. Murray Street Mall is more appropriate than Hay Street Mall. The council's recently adopted a local planning policy which will also designate the Hay Street Mall as a heritage area. So that has a particular character. There are a few illuminated signs in there, but I suppose from my point of view, I think it would be slightly different if these signs were proposed on the Hay Street Mall compared to on the Murray Street Mall, because of the character and the nature of the Murray Street Mall and its direct relationship to Forest Place. So the policy does define some key areas, and this is one of those.
Is there questions?
I
I can come back to you. I've got some.
No, I don't think so.
Okay. Condition 4, which talks to the landscape plan, seems fairly broad. And I just wonder what you're anticipating, having gone through the suite of material that was part of our documentation. It is still quite high level. Is this anticipating this condition a greater level of detail, and would you normally express that with a further advice note in some way? How do you know that you've got what you want, in other words, through this condition?
Certainly. So I suppose the intention is that it does do that. So it gets those final details and that they are at a more detailed level. They'll include all the, I suppose, the design elements, particularly where planting is on structure, to ensure obviously that, appropriate soil depths and others are included, the species types throughout the proposal, and also reticulation plan to ensure sort of ongoing maintenance and the success of the landscaping treatment. We've found that condition has been generally successful in getting the detail that we want. Proponents have been willing to work with the city's Parks and Gardens team to sort of finalise those details. So we typically don't impose an advice note to provide further advice, but open to considering.
Okay, that's all right. Thank you for that answer. The design review panel spoke about ESD requirements and recommendations. However, the RAR made a statement that the city did not have an ESD report requirement. That words almost. So the applicant is proposing some sustainability measures in the material at the moment, but to what extent is that secured through this development assessment and potential approval? Obviously you've got a development policy on green buildings, etc. I think valid. How would you normally approach sustainability in this respect, and in the context of such a major development within the CBD, within the retail core?
Certainly, I suppose, somewhat unfortunate, we rely on the state planning policy in regards to the principles of good design and sustainability being one of them, and also the building legislation. So we don't currently have any, I suppose, specific policy that either mandates or incentivises, a really significant ESD outcome. Within the city's local planning policy for development design, which is a general design guideline for all development, there's general principles, but to be honest, those are probably outdated. They're sort of minimum things that you do, and generally are covered by the building.
So you wouldn't say you had a head of power for anything of that nature?
Not particularly, no. It's something the city's focusing on in its new framework. So we use the design review panel. We definitely encourage it. The proponents addressed it and they've given good commitments, but I suppose unfortunately we haven't had any success in imposing conditions because we don't have the framework to back it up yet.
Okay. Follow up on that.
We didn't
quite. That's fine. The design review panel also spoke about the design of the shop fronts and had some questions around the amount of uninterrupted glazing, shall we say, and perhaps seeking consideration of a more traditional style or a more finer grain rhythm. how have you considered that in the context of the draft recommendation, recommended conditions that are before us? Is there anything further that you would seek to add to that, or in your assessment of what the design review panel said and then your overview, you've decided you're okay with what you see?
Yeah, I might just state what position we came to, and then I can defer to Craig, who'll be better at articulating that. But essentially, the applicant responded to that query and request from the design review panel, and gave us further information as to how the design, including the proportions, the scale, how that was developed in terms of the shop fronts, and also, I suppose, giving consideration to both street frontages are different and unique. So ultimately, we were satisfied that it achieved the intent through their demonstration. But Craig might have some additional comments.
We did raise these questions with them, and they did make some modifications, particularly to the articulation at the Hay Street end. And they also referred to the fact that the actual shop fit outs and would then make some changes to this at any rate.
Their own branding.
And the sizes of the tenancies through there are fairly small, they're not large tenancies. And so the concentration on the differences between each of those tenancies as it comes in at the southern end and from the northern end were considered enough to resolve that particular question that we had about the aspect of the building.
Thank you for that answer. There have also been lots of discussions around the illumination of the signage, but not so much about the illumination of the place as a whole. And where do you see, or do you see, or don't you see the need for an overarching lighting strategy? Not an uncommon thing in a development of this scale. Do you, Mr. Smith?
For me, this is driven by the commerciality of the project. They've chosen to open to the sky all the way through, so changing the nature of the connection, and in many ways that will affect both malls at either end. It is simply not in their interest to not do those things properly. I think the best kind of control you can have is one you don't have to worry about. Frankly, I think that's huge.
All right, okay. The reason I asked was because it was specifically made in the assessment of the plans. When I look at the landscape package, there's talk about public art, or there's a place in that landscape package where they start to talk about public art. But I suppose this is similar to my question around ESD. Does the city have an overarching framework for public art? Does it apply it to developments of this nature? Is that seen as something of a contribution to the community that, again, is a valid consideration when one's thinking about the scale and some of the variations that are taking place? Because I can't see a condition in there that talks to public art.
So we don't, the city doesn't have a % for art or any public art contribution requirement. I suppose it was considered as part of the overall design and quality of the pedestrian link. And that was really wrapped up, I suppose, in the consideration for awarding a bonus plot ratio. So I suppose through our bonus plot ratio policy, particularly around public facilities, it's not simply the provision of the public facility, it's the quality of that space.
Right.
And I suppose the details and the opportunities for activation, for levels of interest, to make those spaces inviting as well as functional, it's considered as part of that. So I suppose we'll get final details of the link, management plans associated with that, but there's no requirement for public art to be included.
Okay, but the reliance would be upon those other conditions that talk to the quality of the materiality and their interface with the public realm, pure public realm, and those other public realm areas around. Okay, thank you for that. I don't think we talked did we about the applicant's request on condition 14? It's
I was just about to
relatively
ask that.
straightforward, 23 to 24 to include the ACROD.
Yes, so we acknowledge, I suppose, between counting bays and licensing bays, there is sometimes some differences. So no, the city has no objection to amending that condition to read 24.
Okay. Thank you. Condition 1 talks to the Metropolitan Region Scheme. Is there a need for that, given the changes
Not
to
anymore.
legislation?
Correct, not in.
Thank you. And my last question, there's obviously some of the submissions talk to the adequacy of advertising and communication around this and the response to submissions. Did you have any comment that you'd like to make about the process that you went through for advertising this and the outreach that you made, you know, to the community regarding this to enable submissions to be made?
The city, as in we're satisfied we follow due process in
Yes,
regards
in
to
due
consultation. I suppose in that extent, we wrote to immediately adjoining landowners and a little bit beyond that. We also made the plans and the details of the application available on the city's website. In this immediate context, I suppose the immediate population is not significant. There's typically only one landowner and maybe only one or a few tenants, unlike other areas in the city where you might be advertising to hundreds of owners within an apartment complex, etc. We had significant, I suppose, interest and inquiries in response to the consultation. It wasn't our contribution, but we also noted that the application, the lodgement of the application attracted a bit of media attention. So that also, I suppose, assisted to spread the word that the city was considering the application. And as many people do these days, took the opportunity to provide a lot of comments on social media. Obviously don't get incorporated into this, but I think particularly for the applicants' visibility, they get a sense of the immediate and broader community, their thoughts and feelings on the proposal. Then we believe, you know, we've considered the submissions. Some submissions, I suppose, speak more broadly to some of the planning concerns, but we understand that, you know, the mix of land uses, the inclusion, exclusion of certain land uses, you know, I suppose we attracted a bit of comment about that. As per our discussion of land use, we believe that there's a suitable combination that will have a significant benefit. There's no requirements in terms of the mix of land uses that has to be or should be proposed on this site. Another key theme that came out was also, understandably, I suppose, concerns about construction and demolition and the potential disruption on businesses, the malls, Forest Place, traffic in the general locality. We acknowledge that it's going to be a challenge.
Got a condition in here that deals with the construction
Absolutely, we've got
management and demolition management process.
Yep, and we'll sort of work through that with the proponent once they've engaged a contractor. And I noticed one of the submissions also alluded to the Forest Place and City Station Act, as well as the DPA. And in that submission, they acknowledged that it was separate legislation and worked through, but obviously ensuring that the city was aware of it. So, we're satisfied. It was a reasonable level of interest, obviously a significant development, and the city, as always, has a broader community than just the immediate community. But I suppose, yeah, we believe there was significant interest, and we've given good consideration of.
Thank you for that response. Thank you. Any other questions, Councillor Ochi?
Thank you very much. Would you consider recommended condition which would include community use in this application? So would the proponent in the signage management plan consider a greater deal and commitment when ensuring they're looking at the procurement of the third party to supply, to make sure that community engagement is there. So we have some sort of certainty and a schedule where the events that the City of Perth hold, WA or Australia events, are significant when we're using those screens.
Thank you for the question. As you know, I suppose the city's recommendation doesn't include that as a component. So our assessment is being based on, as we said, sort of worst case scenario that it could be all third party advertising. If the panel was interested in including that, our recommendation would be that condition 18, which requires the sign management plan to be submitted, be amended to ensure that I suppose a particular percentage of content for community advertising or other is included, and the city then could assess that as part of the submission of the management plan. As mentioned, our science policy doesn't specifically require that anymore, but my recommendation would be that's the condition to possibly amend if that was the request.
Would you wish a follow-up to that? You're comfortable with that? Thank you.
Well, perhaps a follow-up is, can you suggest a form of words that could be incorporated into condition 18?
So I suppose it's a final management plan for the third-party digital, in brackets, animated or variable content, including the provision of no less than X percentage of screen time being dedicated to community advertising.
Further questions? You all right? Councillor Gobbert, any further questions from you?
Just to clarify on what percentage is being recommended there.
Perhaps with reference to things in the past, how have you what sort of threshold, what sort of thing have you?
Just sorry, our collective memory of the previous policy, we believe it's 25%.
25.
And I suppose it was typically, that is a lot, and my recollection of how that was imposed was typically in relation to static billboards, so not digital signage. So typically large billboards on the side of the building had, I suppose, an advertising content, and a portion of that included some sort of community or tenant advertising. I must admit, you know, I suppose, like say, compliance on that is sometimes challenging and difficult. What's 25% of the sign and the way the signage works? So that is quite high.
So if this is actually a temporal change, not a static one, then it's a question of how much of the time, isn't it? So 25 of the time would be a big chunk.
Yeah. So if you look at screen time, and if the screens are to be operate 24 hours, that's a considerable amount of the time dedicated to
something
that.
Something less than 25.
So yeah, it was
Yeah.
the old requirement was really about the sharing of content on the same display. If that makes sense. So as in.
All right, thank you for that. Thank you, Councillor Gobbert. Any further questions? No. From the panel, before we close out on this, any further questions? All good. Thank you to the officers. You can stay there, or you can, you sit to give your water. Happy for you to stay there, honestly. Okay, at this point then, we move ahead with the item, and we have before us a recommendation through the responsible authority report to approve this development subject to a number of conditions. So in the first instance, I'm seeking a mover for that, please, as the primary motion. Do I have a mover? Mr. Lafante, thank you, moves. Do I have a seconder, please? Mr. Syme seconds. Thank you very much. Mr. Lafante, would you like to speak to the primary motion?
Thank you. Thank you for the material that's been provided in the presentations from the submissions that we had today as well. I am supportive of this proposal. The extent of detail that we've got provided and comments from the officers indicate that this is an appropriate development in this particular location. I am satisfied that the scale and land use are appropriate. The design, as per the material we've received a significant exemplary and exceptional considerations of the design through the DRP. It talked about things such as, which I noted down as being particularly significant, as a catalyst for reactivation of the CBD, and I've spent since the material was produced for us, walking around the site in both of the malls to get a sense of what is currently happening on the site, the existing circumstance of it being boarded up and limitations of walking through. I choose not to walk through it because it's actually quite an unattractive space to walk through. The proposal breaking up this structure to create a podium level which is separated as well as towers above it, I think is both unique and appropriate for this location. It's going to be an attractor for many activities and people. It is something we don't see in the city, and I would agree with the comments in the report where it essentially looks more like a formal roadway or walkway or street rather than a pedestrian walkway which is on private property, although connected by agreements and legal arrangements. The inclusion of opening it up to the daylight, I think, is a fantastic idea. The proposal will give an area of difference and create an opportunity that we have talked about in planning terms as being a significant and important element to get the street to engage with the public elements, which is the climatic elements, which is something you don't necessarily get typically outside of the city centre area. Typically they are enclosed mall spaces, which are very different in the dynamics. So I commend the application, the design in opening that up. I note that there's been a substantial amount of space provided to the ground or the interactive public spaces, and I am particularly talking about the F&B and the retail. I like the way the design creates both movements through, opening up walkways as well as opening up the stairs so that community can get in and around the space. From my perspective, that lower level prioritises people, light and movement, and I think that is a fantastic space. The incorporation of the residential activities, the hotel and the student space, I actually think is a good use and a good design for the space. I note that a lot's been talked about in terms of permanent residential versus temporary residential. I hold a view based on material we've received, is based on other elements, that the temporary use of space can create as much, if not greater, activation than permanent spaces, a permanent residential. I don't see this as being a negative element. The proposal and the plans show us that in the case of the actual living spaces, they are small, both in the student and the hotel. That is typical of those particular activities. The normal result of those activities is that they go to the communal spaces. The design of the student accommodation doesn't necessarily have massive communal spaces. From my perspective, that is a good planning element, particularly in a city centre location where it will tunnel and entice those individuals to spend time within the public spaces, enhanced by both the orientation to the spaces in Murray Street, as in the Forest Place, as well as in Hay Street, but particularly in Murray Street, pushing out into the public domain directly opposite the train, and a significant area for buses, which I see as being a significant generation of people movement, both in the space and using the commercial offerings that are there. So from my perspective, I have no issues with those elements of the proposal. I do at this juncture, if I may, like to move some amendments.
Certainly.
My amendment,
Should we take them individually?
yes, if you don't mind,
Yes.
that'd be great. I would like to move Amendment 1
Yes.
is modification of condition 8. I have reviewed the applicant's comment.
To say what it is.
Yes,
And then we'll get a second.
my amendment is quite small
Yes.
It is for the minute taker, sorry, my amendment is it is the third line down. It was to add the following words. It says the area required to be closed to the public in order to secure the buildings on the site, comma, the following words to be added: between 6 a.m. and 12 midnight, comma, and then the rest of the sentence. I'm only including those additional words.
I'm happy to second that. Thank you. Please speak to that, Ms. Lafante.
From my perspective, I understand where the applicant is coming from, although I don't agree from a planning perspective at all that we would set a provision that preempts any changes significantly in a piece of legislation that is not necessarily under our, well, it's not under our control, any legislative change at all. That's the first thing. I also don't like to preempt matters that are beyond the application in front of us. I have included those particular words because I do think it's appropriate in the context of both its location, its context in relation to its land users, its significant amount of lower level interactive spaces through F&B and retail, as well as the types of residential above it, as I've already indicated. From my perspective, the design, including its open space, will encourage the use and occupation of those spaces, and it's appropriate to provide certainty by reflecting those, and those are the only changes I'm making to that.
Thank you. I support those changes. I think the legislation is quite clear about the hours of operation. We've heard from the city that obviously they're mindful of the need for other measures to be taken to ensure public safety and maintenance and so forth. We've also got condition 28, which talks about the public access and security management plan, outlining those details outside of normal operating hours. So I think with the two conditions hand in hand, they will be adequately covered. And I think that would be Mr. Dawkins. Just is there something?
It's just that the DPA allows it for Good Friday and Christmas Day, so it actually should be 364 days, not 363 days.
3. Are we in agreement with that from the city's point of view?
No objection to that.
Should we make that amendment 363 days then?
I'm happy to include that.
Yes, okay. So we have a movement there to also change 364 to 363 of condition 8. Anyway, I've spoken to that. So has Ms. Lafante. Other speakers on amendment 1, Mr. Syme?
Yes, I think that's right. I think we can agree. This is a worthwhile amendment to this condition. I think what it does in effect is just make clear what a core provision of the DPA actually is for the avoidance of any doubt. And if at some stage in the future the applicant wants to change that, then there are plenty of opportunities and ways for that to happen. But I think at this stage we clarify and establish the DPA and its essential provision, and that's what this does.
Any other speakers on amendment 1 before we go to vote? Okay. Do you wish any right to reply? No. Let's vote on amendment 1. Those in favour? Unanimous. Thank you. Back with you, Ms. Lafante. Further amendments?
I will move amendment 2, which is the deletion of condition 1. I know you've spoken to it. It is not required as a result of legislation.
That. Thank you. Did you wish to say anything?
Other than it's not required as a result of change of legislation.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else wish to speak on that amendment 2? Those in favour, therefore? Unanimous, thank you. Back to you, Ms. Lafante. Other amendments?
Yes, there are. Sorry. Amendment 3 for the minute taker, yes. A modification to condition 14. It was something we discussed. The changes are pretty much as per the applicant's requested changes, and that includes reference to 24 commercial tenant parkings, which includes 1 Acrid Bay.
So, delete 3, insert 24, commercial tenant car parking bays,
And then
bracket,
And including,
and including ACROD, close bracket, being provided on site.
yes.
I'm again happy to second that. Did you wish to speak to that?
The clarification is relevant in the context of this development and the plans before us, including that the one ACRA bay is not accounted in the parking calculation through the licensing.
Thank you. I'm comfortable with it. It simply follows what's marked on the plans and it's a fairly standard approach. So comfortable with that. Any other speakers before we go to vote? Those in favour of that amending motion? Unanimous, thank you. On with you then, Ms Lafante.
I am going to condition, amendment 4.
Yep.
My amendment is to condition 18. I wish to modify condition 18 by adding the following words. The words will read: a final sign management plan for the third party digital (brackets animated and variable sign content wall signs, comma. The words that I wish to include are including the provision of 10% of screen time being dedicated to community and, I put here, entertainment material, because I note there is elements that the applicant did refer to in relation to big sporting events, which are community attractors and they're interactive. So that's the reason
Would you wish to clarify that's a minimum of 10%?
Yes, sorry, a minimum, I beg your pardon. So the words for the minute table will be including the provision of a minimum of 10% of screen time being dedicated to community and entertainment, and I'll speak further.
I'm happy to second that. Thank you. Ms Lafante, please.
So from my perspective, I support the significant variation to the amount of screen that is provided. The design of the screen is incorporated in the building, which is positive, but I do think its significant location hasn't been spoken about today in terms of it gets its opportunity because of the public realm, particularly Forest Place, and it should provide more than just commercial advertising. It should be advertising that enhances community use of that space, as well as entertainment use of that space, encouraging people to go there. Those are a whole variety of community elements to it, but also entertainment material. And I suppose I think of entertainment material as around sporting activity. So I haven't really gone as far as saying that, but they are big attractors of people to the site, to the place, and by the very nature of attracting those people to the site, it is people to the place, it attracts people to the site. So from my perspective, there is a direct correlation to both use of the spaces on the site, the extent of variation being sought for both unlisted use and the size of it, and that it takes its benefit because of Forest Place, and therefore is appropriate that there's a relationship in terms of use of Forest Place.
Thank you. Seconder, I agree with everything you said. I don't think that this is a commercial imposition. On the other hand, I think that it could actually add to the commerciality of the precinct by making it an attraction. We're not talking about an onerous amount of time. We've heard how other policies in the past have been applied. We've taken that into consideration and tried to make this a reasonable request. But noting that this is a variation, it is a use not listed. We do have to think of things in the context of the scheme and what it lends to the community. And I think there is an opportunity there that we need to encourage the applicant with its third party contractual arrangements to ensure that there is a public benefit from something of this nature. Other speakers to this amendment? Mr. Syme?
yes, I agree with that. I would just say in passing, I wouldn't like all of this screen time to be at 3 o'clock in the morning. I think it should be reasonable hours of the day, but I think we'll leave the amendment as is at this stage. I think this is a substantial element in the landscape. It will change the character of Forest Place to some extent. I think it needs to do more than just be a nice commercial outcome. I'm not not convinced by the argument that Mr. Dawkins made about the activation aspects of it. I think in the first instance, it's a commercial enterprise, and I think given the amount of departure that we've got from this policy, the applicant needs to give something back, and I think this is one way of doing that. And I think 10% is a reasonable number.
Thank you. Other speakers to this amendment? No? Let's put that to the vote. Those in favour of this amendment, that's unanimous. Thank you. Any other amendments you wish to make? You wish to close your speaking? Are you happy? You've said enough without the right of reply. Sorry, I didn't mean that.
No, that's fine.
Utmost respect. Okay, so that's fine. Seconder, Mr. Syme, would you like to speak?
Oh, I seconded it, that's right. Yes, look, I with these modifications, I do like this development very much. It's giving the city a new street, and it's always been on these great long blocks between Street and Barrack Street. The city always been stretching for connections, north-south connections, and this is a particularly good one, and in a particularly critical location. And I think the project team has done this in a very skillful way, I must say. And it is an amazingly difficult site, and I think the to actually pull off, it's got not quite apart from its prominence in the city, its access is actually really, really difficult, and the way that they've been able to work on the access arrangements for the tunnel and so on, I think is a particularly inspired move, I must say. I do like the idea of it not being an enclosed space. The fact that it is open, I think, is a really interesting approach to it. It really does make it a new street in the city, a north-south street, and I think that's very attractive. I think the mix of land uses are particularly good. Look, the gold standard on here would be residential apartments, I suppose, permanent residents. We're not getting that in the middle of the city. The fact that we can get 1,000 beds in there in this key location does significant amounts, significant contribution to actually activating the general life of the city for all hours of the day. And I think that as a really useful addition to the city is a really good one. I think it's a very particularly good addition to the city. I think that these amendments, it's a fantastic and fantastic project, and I think we should look forward to it seeing the light of day. I think it'll be good.
Thank you, Mr. Syme. Other speakers? Thank you, Councillor Gobbert.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, echo those comments from Mr. Syme. The fragmented nature of land tenure in the city makes it particularly challenging when approaching a development of this scale. So it's very pleasing to see that it's been approached in a very delicate way such as this. I'm pleased to see the Undercroft area has been utilised, which I see as over the life of the development and the ongoing management will aid in the waste management and delivery of goods and materials through the city, and taking that vehicular traffic or keeping it out of the mall to ensure that there is a good pedestrian environment. Upper floor activation and activation within the malls themselves, particularly after hours, has been an ongoing challenge, and it's pleasing to see that there has been a serious consideration given to activating the centre of our city, and that is a good thing in my books. So I accept that there's been some concern raised regarding the height of the development, but on application of the principles of town planning, I think the overall result presents a good development outcome. There's often conjecture in broader metropolitan sense regarding the impacts of height, but if there's one place in a city where height is expected, surely it's in the middle of the city. Overall happy with the amendments that have been made, and I think that on balance this presents a good development outcome and it will create a lasting positive impact for the central city of Perth. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Gobbett, could I prompt you, did you wish to make an amendment to condition 20? You had some wording in mind when we commenced regarding an Australian standard. I can't recall it exactly.
Yes, so that was, and thank you, Chair. Yes, it related to the illumination levels to comply with Australian standard, and for the minute taker, it is AS 4282-2023. And I'm happy to take some guidance on where that might be included in condition 20, I believe. If it's a brackets after the words a low level of illumination, brackets to comply with AS 4283-2023, close brackets. I think that might achieve the intent.
Thank you. I'm happy to second that. Councillor Gobbett, did you wish to speak to it any further?
No.
Okay, thank you. Any other speakers on that amending motion 5? Those in favour of amending motion 5? That's unanimous. Thank you very much. Did you have anything further you wish to say about the substantive? Okay. Councillor Doshi, did you wish to speak to the substantive? Okay, thank you. I have a few comments that I will share. I was quite comfortable supporting this, and with the amendments that we have made, I do note that nearly all the uses are permitted and preferred under the scheme, which is always a good starting point. It is of a capital city scale, which is what we're looking for. It's a project that will add vibrancy, activity, surveillance, legibility, permeability to an area that desperately needs all of those conditions. And it is an architectural statement, and I commend you on that. That's exactly what the capital city needs, and particularly in this core of the CBD. It's a much needed reuse of the site. Like Miss Lafanti, I've taken time to wander through, and I remember how it was before, and it was still not great. And it's a really difficult vacant area at the moment. So reuse of that site is very welcome. It is very complex, as Mr. Syme has said. It's a project across multiple levels, and again, it's a proposal which takes account of those in a very considered way across all those levels. And it's well designed. It's been negotiated well with all of the assessors, and it's not an uncomplicated framework that you have to deal with in that respect. So with regards to the third-party advertising signs, I'm satisfied that as a use not listed, they're still appropriate in this location for the conversations that you've heard. I concur with those, and I'm comfortable with the amendment that we've made to that to include a proportion of time for community sense of place and sense of purpose. I think the podium heights proposed, they're relatively minor variations, but again, I'm comfortable with that in the scale and the human scale, particularly because in part we're kind of within those podiums as part of the public area. I don't think they have a particular impact on the public realm other than to give basically good grounding to the towers above from an urban design point of view. The tower elements are not obviously or within the height plane, but the 3D modelling that the city has done, which is an excellent tool, has demonstrated that the design minimises overshadowing, and obviously that separation of towers is actually rather cleverly done, I think, to give different perspectives and different aspects to the occupants. I'm comfortable with the plot ratio. We did have some discussions around that. The public link, as we've all said, is super important and very much needed. And the approach that's being taken, and I think that's the reason for keeping some of those conditions in despite the applicant's request, is just to ensure that they're well handled, well managed, well designed, and I'm sure that that is the intent. It just satisfies the framework to have those conditions there should there be any changes from a proponency point of view. Other variations are relatively minor, given the scale and complexity of the development type, and also not forgetting that this is an infill site, which is about the most complex redevelopment we can have. So I'm very happy to support. That being said, I have no further amendments to make. I think we've covered all the amendments that we had listed. So I return to you, Ms. Lafanti, for right of reply and closure of debate.
Thank you. I've said quite a bit about the lower level of design. Concur with comments that have been said in relation to both the height and the design configuration. The opening up and the separation of the footings are a significant positive aspect, as stated. Overall, the proposal has been well considered at all elements and inclusive of modifications to the conditions, both at ground floor, providing that interaction at ground level, up through the range of services that encourages the public to use into a more active residential type of activity through the sort of temporary accommodation, and the physical form that separates those buildings, creating an opportunity for visitors through the site. Overall, this development is an excellent development in this location and within the central core, and I'm fully supportive of the proposal.
Thank you. That closes the debate. Let us put the matter as amended to the vote. Those in favour? That's unanimous. Thank you. That closes that particular item. Moving back to our agenda, item 4, we have no Form 2 DAP applications. Item 5, we have no Section 31 SAT reconsiderations. Other business, there are matters at the SAT at the moment for this intermetropolitan DAP, South Perth, Cambridge, Canning, but nothing at the moment for the city of South Perth. Netherlands also on that list. And with that, I'd just like to take the opportunity to thank everybody for the time that they've given to this meeting, for the considerations and the time and the amount of information that they provided to the panel through their submissions and through their responses to questions. Very much appreciated and helps us greatly with decision making. And I will therefore thank the elected members from the City of Perth and other panel members. We'll close the meeting at 11:33. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair.